The problem is the American people don't read. I mean, they could read my book. It's got all the answers. It's written for a sixth grade student. No charts, no graphs. But people are not reading. They won't, anything that takes longer than 5 minutes. They don't want to watch a long video. They don't want to know the truth. And they're going to suffer the consequences because we're gradually getting more and more control.
Welcome, everybody, to Conversations That Matter for the New American Magazine. I'm your host, Alex Newman. With us today, a very special guest, Jim Hollingsworth. He is many things. He's got a degree in social science with a minor in geology and then a master's degree. He also has written a number of books. The one I'm most interested in today is about global warming. We're just getting ready to go to Egypt for the climate conference there hosted by the United Nations. And Jim's got a very interesting book. He gave it to me and I read it. It's called Climate Change, A Convenient Truth. Jim, tell us what you found in your research on the subject of climate change.
Well, I was motivated to get into this because there's so much hype on climate change. Look what's going on in Europe right now. I mean, those people are going crazy. They're going to end up in the dark and cold. And no one has yet proven that carbon dioxide is a poison or that it controls the temperature. And yet they're using that as the basis for all these phony things they're trying to do, and it's costing trillions of dollars. So
what do you think they're up to then? If they're not really trying to save the planet from man-made global warming, what are they doing, Jim?
I don't think there's any question about it. They're trying to exercise control over all the people. It's what we call tyranny. It's a terrible thing. And the average American has no understanding. It builds in fear, just like with the COVID situation. You get people to be afraid of enough stuff, they'll do anything you ask them to do.
And so what's the best way to combat this threat, Jim? How do we resist the efforts to control us under the guise of saving the planet?
Well, I think what you're doing, as editor of the New American, I mean, there's been good article after good article. The problem is the American people don't read. I mean, they could read my book. It's got all the answers. It's written for a sixth grade student. No charts, no graphs. But people are not reading. They won't, anything that takes longer than 5 minutes. They don't want to watch a long video. They don't want to know the truth. And they're going to suffer the consequences because we're gradually getting more and more control, even down on the local level. And we're having some real battles right here in Coeur d'Alene.
So what's going on in Coeur d'Alene? You'd think that would be one place that would be safe from this. It's, one of the most conservative places in the country. What's happening up there?
Well, we have a college called North Idaho College, and its enrollment has gradually gone down for about a generation. And so we successfully elected a couple guys to the board here a couple of years ago, and they got in some difficulty, and the existing board members fought against them until gradually some resigned, and then there were others appointed by the State Board of Education and so forth. Anyway, we have found 3 really conservative candidates to run to fill the slot, and they're getting all kinds of phony resistance, lies, and other stuff against them. So each one of the candidates has put out over 400 signs. So we're hoping that we can win because they're all coming from the same basic foundation. They're all Christians, whereas the people that were on there before were socialists and Democrats, and you know what they believe.
Yeah. So you've spent a lot of time in ministry. You've served as a missionary. You've done very detailed studies on the Bible. You've worked with tribes. You stayed with the Tepuhuan peoples in northern Mexico for 4 years as missionaries. What do you think is the relation between the Bible, Christianity, and this climate change narrative? Is there one?
I think there's definitely a relation. Anybody that reads the Bible from Genesis to Revelation would never be caught up in this drama with climate change, because there's so much information in the Bible about climate, and then all these social issues, like transgender. The Bible starts right out in the first chapter saying that God only made men and women, and all these different things that you can find. The Bible has the answer, but you'll find very few Christians, people who read their Bible every day, that subscribe to climate change. dramas.
Yeah. Well, I've gone to these UN summits for many years, and there's always, Christian leaders there. I've interviewed some of them, and they said we have an obligation. God commands us. We need to be good stewards of the earth, and that means, signing up to the UN climate change stuff and the sustainable development. How do you address that? How do we be good stewards of the earth if not by reducing our carbon footprints?
The best way to take good care of the earth is to take care of it. I mean, what is there around us? What's in my yard that I need to protect? What's in our city? It's not a matter of the climate. God makes the climate. And I think most of our climate is controlled by the sun. So it's a fairly simple process. But, I'm really glad you're going to COP27 in Egypt. I hope you learn some Arabic to speak. But, they should have stopped with the 20th. I mean, they haven't added anything since the Paris Accord. It's crazy.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting because the Communist Chinese promise they're going to keep increasing their CO2 emissions, and we here in the Western world said, we're going to keep slashing ours. So we'll send all our factories over to China. I guess Chinese CO2 emissions aren't quite as dangerous for the planet as evil American CO2 emissions. Jim, before we let you go, what should be the Christian response to all this? I mean, Christian looking at this, we're hearing all these conflicting messages. We're hearing that the earth is doomed. How should a Christian who believes the Bible be looking at this climate change narrative, these UN climate summits, and this whole narrative that the earth is going to be destroyed unless humans give all this power to the UN and to governments to regulate CO2?
Well, I think the answer, first off, they need to read the New American.
I agree.
I know you would. But, they could buy my book. It's a simple answer to a multitude of questions. You read it, you know what's in it.
Where do you get it, Jim? What's the best place to get it?
Oh, any place books are sold, Amazon or Barnes and Noble or any of those places. It's in a second edition, so, we tried to bring it up to date. But, I think the Christian who truly loves the Lord and loves the country is going to take care of it. I mean, you don't just go around burning up forests and destroying stuff. And God wants us to even Adam and Eve in the garden, their first responsibility was to take care of the environment.
Yep. You've done so much interesting work over your life. I know one of your books is about the culture of the Aztecs. I know it's not really exactly related to what we're talking about, but I just, as long as we have you here, I thought I'd ask. I grew up in Mexico. I spent more years in Mexico than any other place. And so it was regular, we'd go on school field trips to these temples and stuff. And the guides would say, oh yeah, here is where they would chop out the hearts from people and, sacrificing them to these gods. And yet in the state of California, their new, I think a federal court told them they better get rid of it. But they had this thing where the kids in elementary school were supposed to chant to these Aztec gods of cannibalism and war and human sacrifice. What do you think is going on with that? Tell us a little bit about Aztec culture and the paganism of the day, and why is it still manifesting now, even in the United States, in public school systems?
Well, it's just a convenient organ. I mean, I wrote a biography of Cortez and also on the Aztecs, but you can base the things you believe that are not true on just about anything, and that's what's going on with the Aztecs. You remember that Cortez, with an army of about 600, he overcame more than 1 million Aztecs, but he'd come in and he'd take one little group, and then he'd get them on his side, and then they'd take the next one. So it was a fantastic thing the way it worked, but it didn't improve Mexico at all. The Indians were probably, he went in, he destroyed their whole culture, tore down their towns. They had some really advanced, although, it's interesting that all the history of Latin America, all the history of the Indians, they're never discovered the principle of wheel and axle. It's interesting that they just drug stuff around behind llamas and stuff. They didn't even have horses.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. Hernan Cortez managed to take over Mexico. Then Francisco Pizarro took over the Inca Empire with just a few hundred guys and horses. Why do you think that was? And nowadays we're taught that it was 100% wrong, and that these Spaniards who came were just 100% evil. Even Christopher Columbus. Do you share that view, or was there any benefit achieved by having them come here?
Well, I guess we could all move back to Europe if you think that'd be better. But I think Christopher Columbus has got a lot of really bad press, and even the early men that started this republic get a very bad press. And it's too bad. I've written other books. I wrote one on abortion, which was just out, and I'm just finishing up publishing a book on commentary on the Book of Romans. It's just that the editor that edited it just changed. It was all based on the King James Bible, and they took out all the references, changed all the quotations, changed all the punctuation. It was terrible.
Oh, wow.
Well, they're having to go through it again.
All right. Well, hey, Jim, we appreciate you joining us today. Thank you for sharing your insights on climate and other issues. And that book, again, is Climate Change, A Convenient Truth. And you can find it wherever good books are sold. Jim, thanks again for coming on. Jim Hollingsworth. And thanks, everybody, for watching. We appreciate you all. This is Conversations That Matter. I'm Alex Newman, Senior Editor at The New American. Until next time, God bless you all.